Okay, we've already started in this unit by looking at place. We defined place as an area on Earth's surface that possesses some characteristic, right? Whether it's human or physical. We looked at defining place and location with site and situation, toponyms, right? We've really dealt with a lot of things so far in this unit. We're going to take that and we're going to go a step further now. We're going to look at regions. Regions, by definition, are collections of places, right? It's an area on Earth's surface that is connected on the basis of one or more unifying characteristics or patterns of activity. What we need to recognize right off the bat with our regional studies or regionalization is that many regions are contested, which means that they're debatable. And I'm going to show you that right here on this map that I have over to the right. In addition to that, many of our regions overlap, and that's very essential to recognize. Over here, we have a map of the United or of the world, I'm sorry, as divided by regions by the World Bank. Okay, so the World Bank has looked at the world and decided to divide it into these chunks. We'll notice that this is a little bit different than the one that we divide in class in looking at 10 major world regions. There's nothing wrong with that. We just want to recognize that different people or different groups are going to categorize the world in different ways. We're going to show you what AP Human Geography generally uses for regions, but that does not mean that's the only way to classify the world. Another thing that we want to recognize as we start regionalization, we want to know that regions can be applied at each of our different scales. We can look at regions at the local level, the national level, and even at the global level, which is what we see over here to the right in this image. So let's break it down. There are three different types of regions that most geographers tend to classify. The first, and in my opinion, probably the easiest to recognize, is a formal region. We refer to formal regions as uniform and homogeneous because they share in common usually one, but sometimes more characteristics, whether that is a physical characteristic like a desert or a climate area, or political, maybe it's cultural, social, dealing with language or religion, or maybe it's economic, whether it deals with currency or agricultural profit or whatever it might be. So look at this map. This is a political map of the world, also broken down into formal regions. The United States is definitely a formal region. No one is going to debate that. First of all, you have measurable data to argue that the United States is formal. For one, you have internationally recognized boundary lines here in Hawaii. We have recognized boundary lines, not only recognized by United States citizens, but also governments around the world. In addition to that, we have a central governing body, right? We have our United States governing body. We look at the Constitution as our major document for reference, and then we have our three branches of government. We've got executive, we've got legislative, we've got our judicial branches, all with those equal checks and balances intended to keep our society moving in check, working the way that it's supposed to, etc. And then we have a representative democracy. We have a voice to allow the people then to elect those to represent them. That is our political unit. And therefore, everyone within these boundary lines in this formal region shares those common benefits, I guess, of this United States political unit, whether that's liberty or freedom or happiness, right? If we look back to our Constitution and our founders. That's what makes here our formal region. What gets tricky then is when we use the United States as a formal region, we could also use the United States as a functional region. A functional region is any area that is organized around a focal point or a node, which is why it's also referred to as a nodal region. And then it shares an activity that really is possessing that space, that moves across that space. So if we looked at the United States as a functional region, we'd have to point to our political node, which would be our capital in Washington, D.C. We can also look, though, at functional regions, maybe at more of a local scale. I usually like to think of functional regions dealing with communication or transportation networks. We also know, however, that functional regions, again, could be political, it could be economic. Maybe you're looking at the functional region of a Macy's department store, and that would be where the Macy's services, right? So, how many people are going to come to that Macy's store to buy goods? What's tricky about functional regions, especially today in the 21st century, is technology is really breaking these down. We like to think of functional regions locally here as food delivery areas, right? So you could look at a Jimmy John's delivery area. The picture to your right might be a Domino's delivery area or a Pizza Hut delivery area. The people that are in that area are working to get that service. In this case, that service would be the delivery of food, right? Usually, generally speaking, if you live outside of that delivery area or out of that functional region, you can't get food delivered to you, right? There's a lot of people. I usually have students who are outside the Jimmy John's delivery area. Their home falls outside of those coordinates, which means they won't deliver to you. So you are outside of that functional region. What's happening, however, with technology is, especially you can see here with Domino's as our case study, this is from Food Business News. You can see that different companies are trying to really revolutionize that functional region. So Domino's delivering to places that are outside of just your home, right? Which is really a new idea for functional regions. You can see the same thing with news and media. For example, you have television broadcasting stations. The node would be the actual broadcasting station, KETV, WWT, whatever it might be. That would be your node. And then anyone who receives that service can get that TV news station channel, would be in your functional region. That still holds true because we still have towers, right? Whether it's a radio station or a television or a cell phone, towers that are allowing that signal to communicate. But what about news, right? To get the newspaper, you used to have to live within the functional region of that newspaper delivery area, right? So the New York Times, the Washington Post, even the Omaha World Herald. Today, because of technology and the internet, now you can virtually live outside of that functional region but still receive that information and that news. So functional regions are getting tricky to identify for geographers because technology is really beginning to break those down. Very different then from formal and functional regions are what geographers call a vernacular or a perceptual region. A vernacular region then is an area that is defined by an informal sense of place or a belief about an area that exists, usually because of either our experiences or our perceptions or maybe our knowledge that we gain from school. Many times, this is also referred to as kind of a mental map, the way that we visualize, understand, perceive, believe about the world around us, right? For example, in the United States, here at the national level, we know that, well, maybe we should know, or we are going to know that the regions that we believe exist, the Midwest, the Northeast, the South, the West Coast, these regions, and I'm quoting it, you just can't see that, aren't formal. There's no measurable data. They're based on stereotypes and based on our perceptions of the world. Generally, we perceive our functional or our vernacular and perceptual regions based on where we live. So people outside of the Midwest have very strong ideas about what it means to be in the Midwest, right? You can see, and I put this map on here on purpose. This map of the Midwest doesn't even include Nebraska and Colorado. Many of them do, but I want to again show you that if you just Google a map of the Midwest, you're going to get debatable data. So what do people think about the Midwest? A lot of people believe that Midwesterners are polite, yet very uncultured. They believe that we all have very flat land, which is good for agriculture. And in fact, when I went to school in Missouri and told people I was from Omaha, some of the first questions I got from my friends that were from the coast, they asked if I rode cows to school. They asked if I had cattle in my backyard. Just this perception of where people live. We tend to have those different ideas about other regions as well, about people who live in different areas of the United States. We can apply these perceptual or vernacular regions to the global level as well. We could also apply it to the local level and break down Omaha. And, people have perceptions about different areas or regions here in Omaha. Some of those might hold true. Some of those might be stereotypes that have been perpetuated on the news or in our newspapers or just in gossip or conversation. And this is where regions become very, very tricky for us to understand. So let's go even bigger than that, right? Understanding those three types of regions, formal, functional, and vernacular, are important, but then we have to know how to apply those to the big picture. What geographers tend to do is they try to break up the global scale of the world by looking at different regions. So you can see here, and you should have labeled this on your map packet, you can see here the 10 major, per AP Human Geography, regions of the world. You guys can see here that we have broken down the Americas into North America, Central America, and South America. And you can see when we get into our subregions, that's broken down even further then. You can see then we have our European area here. You've got your Russian Republic, which we'll get into later when we look at 20th century political history. You've got Africa, and then you've got sub-Saharan Africa. We're going to notice when we get to our subregions that Africa is actually broken down into 5 different subcategories, which we'll talk about the importance of that here in just a minute. So why do geographers tend to break up the world regions? It's the same way that historians try to divide up history into different eras, is to try to get a better understanding of the world, because just by looking at continents, it's not that simple, because we know that our continents, we know that because of history and culture and imperialism and trade and migration, we know that different areas have been broken up into different regions. And because of that, it becomes more accurate to break up the world into smaller areas for understanding. We do the same thing here then with subregions. We have broken up these subregions to truly try to get a better understanding of the world. Sometimes they share characteristics with their larger regions, but they really break down for some traits, whether it is culture, whether it is climate, whether it is language, which is a broken down of culture. But we really begin to then see the world broken down into sub-regions. You can go even further than that then. You can go into smaller regions. We can look at the smaller regions by really changing the scale and zooming in. Here, then, we're looking more at, I wouldn't necessarily say the local level, but really trying to understand a little bit better and going in. Here is where you can really look then at your spice chart, looking at climate or language, religion, ethnicity, economics, whatever it might be. Here you can see an image of the Sun Belt. That could be a climate region. You see here the Rust Belt. This is the Great Lakes region where, when industry started trending to the south, a lot of your machinery up here in the Great Lakes, which used to be the industrial center of the world, especially of the United States, it really started rusting, right? So it's referred to as the vernacular Rust Belt. And then again, you can see these different regions here that are broken up in the United States. Regional study, again, is so important for geographers to truly try to get a closer look and a better understanding of the physical and the cultural and just really the impacts of the world broken down.